Greg, thank you. I'll go ahead and get started on this. So obviously about a month ago, we had Fred come in and talk about appraisals and so forth. And one of the a little bit aggravating things about it, nothing against Fred or anything, was the fact that we didn't really talk about pricing, which was a little bit, like I said, aggravating. So Greg, I and Brenda kind of got together and talked about what can we do to help you guys out. And so the thought was, this is not so much about the comps that you have to go out and find. We're going to have a different separate class on that, on how to go about finding comparables that are for homes that are a challenge. Instead, this is going to be more of a roundtable discussion about how Brenda and I do things differently when it comes to pricing strategies. There has been I'd say the past year, I've had a number of people come into the office, ask me, how would you price this out, or what kind of adjustment should I make, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Going into this, I want you guys to understand that the way Brenda does things is different than I do things. The way I do things is different than how Sherry does things. It's not that what you're doing is right or wrong. It's a matter of how do you go about doing it. And this discussion is going to be about giving you ideas on how to do things that make sense to you. You guys understand that, right? So Brenda's got, when we were talking about how we're going to set this class up, she was talking about some of the things that she does. I'm like, oh, you know what? That's something I need to start implementing when I price out homes. So when we get to that point, what kind of adjustments we make and so forth, we're going to have talks about, okay, what about remodeled properties? What about, age differences, or unusual situations. And for those of you that are veterans in the class, I would like for you guys to chime in. So how we're going to do this is, I want Brenda to go first, and she's going to spend about 10 to 15, 20 minutes or so talking about, generally speaking, how she goes about doing things. What'd she do? I missed it. Yeah.
20 minutes?
She's,
what the hell?
you get to go first. She's going to spend about 20 minutes talking about how she goes about pricing properties. And then I'm going to spend about 10 to 20 minutes on how I go about doing things. And then we're going to open it up for discussions and questions. So, Miss Brenda, you have the floor.
Why, thank you. Okay, so after you gather your comps, you've got your tax sheet, you've looked at everything that you need to look at, and you have all of the stuff laid out before you, looking at now what? Even though one of the beautiful things about real estate, and one of the frustrating things about real estate for us, is that even if you have two properties that are exactly the same in every way on paper, they're two unique properties because every single piece of dirt is different. As you know, in real estate, you own the surface of the earth all the way down to the core and all the way up into infinity, and everything that's attached. So that unique piece of land makes that property completely non-homogeneous, unlike anything else, no matter how close to the comps it is. However, in order to get a price range, I never give a seller a price, because first of all, it's not my house, so I am not determining value. I am determining a price range. The market actually determines value. I don't. I determine a range that makes sense. And in this market, my thing is, I determine a range I can prove. Because if I have to put my neck out for something I can prove, I want to make sure that I can prove it in spades, so that I don't have a problem talking to an appraiser, talking to a lender, talking to an underwriter. So the first thing that I look at is, is the house in the comparable properties? I want homes that are of similar age. Our MLS helps with this very much because it's got that age range. Now, if you've got, our age range goes from like 1 to 5 or 0 to 5, or used to under 5, 5 to 10, and up from there. If you've got something that's 9 years old, you are probably going to want to use 2 age ranges and then actually look at each one of the comps and get something that's 9, 10, 11, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. But the age range is the most important thing that appraisers look at first, besides location. I mean, you're not gonna, location first, but then age range, because you wanna make sure that you've got a similar age range. Newer houses sell for more. That's just a fact. And if you look at new construction versus existing construction, it proves it 1,000 times. If you look at a subdivision that has a phase 1 and a phase 2, newer homes are going to sell for more than the older ones. So you want to make sure that your age range is decent. Second of all, I agree with Fred that main floor bedrooms are not as, well, I shouldn't say that. Overall bedrooms are not nearly as important as main floor square footage. Everything that I look at, I go in square footage, and appraisers will not go anywhere more than 18% either way. So when I'm looking at figuring out what is a comp, I take 18% less than the subject square footage and 18% more than the subject square footage, and that is my square footage range. I would rather go back farther in days or go out farther in area than to comp a square footage that is not within that range. Because if an appraiser, okay, so everybody knows how the appraisal thing works. And I know you guys know this, but I'm gonna give it quick thing. When the lender orders an appraisal, everything is done online. They don't talk to anybody. They can't choose an appraisal. They send their order to a third-party company online. That third-party company then sends out a blast to every single appraiser that is approved for that lender. Whoever grabs it first wins the appraisal. That appraiser then does their job and sends the appraisal back to the third-party company. That third-party company sends it through an underwriting approval process to make sure that it falls within the requirements for secondary loan mortgage market. If it does not meet that those requirements, then the third-party company shoots it back to the appraiser and tells them they've got to make changes. When it comes back, they send it through underwriting again to make sure that it conforms. Once it conforms, they then send it through a portal to the lender. The lender then sends it through underwriting to make sure that it conforms. And if it conforms, then we are told that it has been received. So through that entire process, nobody speaks to anybody. You can't, it's all done online and it's all anonymous. So when we get a value on a property, it's been looked at by 2 different underwriters, making sure that it falls within the guidelines to be sold on the secondary mortgage market. Those guidelines will help you determine value more than anything else. And the big thing with those guidelines are year built and 18% of the square footage, foundation, and area.
The question is, what do you mean by foundation?
What's it built on? Comparing a home with a basement to a home with a crawl isn't, there's no comparison.
I have microphones spread around, so if you want to ask a question, please use the microphone so it records.
I heard Charlie Brown's mom.
Don't worry about it. He was just letting everyone know that there's microphones around for people to use.
Thank you. Yeah, if anybody has I know Lance said we'll have questions at the end, but you guys know me. I take my energy from others. So if you want to say something, say something. If you're online, If you hold your space bar down to talk, it will unmute you for a minute and then remute you when you let it up. So don't be shy. So those are the things that I look at first. And like I said, I agree with Fred. If you're looking at square footage is more important in determining value than how many bedrooms are on the main floor. However, if you have everything in the area that is sold in the last 6 months has 3 bedrooms and 1,400 square feet, and you've got a home that's 1,400 square feet, but it only has 2 bedrooms on the main floor, that house is going to be worth less than everything else. My rule of thumb, and it is just a rule of thumb from experience, is between 5,000 and 7,000. Same thing with a lake lot. If you've got something that's on a pond, as opposed to something that's in the subdivision not on the pond, you will always, almost always, have more comparables to deal with that are in the middle in the subdivision than you will that are on the pond. However, a lake lot does get more money. Depending on the subdivision, it could be anywhere from 7,000 to 15,000, depending on the subdivision, in my experience. Again, these are not hard numbers. These are rules of thumb that I use based on experience.
I have a comment,
Please.
which I hope you will take as a question.
Sure.
If your neighborhood has 25% 2 bedrooms and 75% 3 bedrooms, do you try to say, because I have 2 bedrooms, it's worth a lot less? Or do you say the neighborhood mix is enough, it really doesn't matter?
If there are at least 3 comps that can show me prices for 2 bedrooms, then I don't need to worry about it. But if everything that has sold, so there's only 25% of 2 bedrooms, that means there's 75% of 3 bedrooms. If I have in my comparables, I've got 5 sold properties that are similar to the subject, and 4 of them are 3 bedroom and only 1 of them is a 2 bedroom, that is not enough of a comp, that is not enough information to know that to pinpoint the difference between a 3 bedroom and a 2 bedroom. Because you don't know what other factors there were in that 2 bedroom that dropped the price. So if you always try and match square footage, bedrooms, your built, those kind of things. You get as close to the subject as you possibly can. But if you're comparing if all you have for comps are 3 bedrooms and you're looking at pricing a 2 bedroom, you're gonna wanna adjust for that. Even though the square footage is there, a buyer is going to see less value, and so is an appraiser, and 2 bedrooms on the main. Does that make sense?
Yes, and thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Another thing that makes a difference, and a really great example of that, okay, so I had a house in Derby. It was in a subdivision that is very, I mean, you guys know how houses are selling right now. And recently I have only been going back 3 months because property values have changed so much. You guys, I don't know if you've been looking at, I'm sure you've all been looking at this because I have been, but property values in the last 12 months have, in our market area, have gone up an average of 17%. We have never seen this type of increase ever. We are a 3 to 5% increase a year, very steady, very, very predictable. We have seen an average of 17% in the last 12 months. And what is happening right now, in my opinion, is that sellers are chasing the market up and it's causing buyers to stall. And I don't know if you guys have seen this, and I would love to hear some input because I'm ready to strangle every one of my sellers and my buyers because of it. But what I have seen is sellers are getting greedy because they're watching their neighbor's house sell in 2 days and saying, well, you know, they told me they got more than asking, so you told me it was worth 200. Let's try it at 230 and see what happens. Okay, I told you don't go over 200 or you're out of the market. They were at 189 and now you want to go 230, and you know, so seller, and what buyers are doing is when they see that, when they're seeing the sellers chasing the market up, they're pulling back and not making offers. They see it, they love it, and decide, okay, you know what, if somebody's going to overpay that much, let them do it. We'll wait and see what happens. And that has been evidenced by, and like in Andover right now, the average days on market has gone up 9 days in the last week, which I find just ridiculous. I mean, it, you know, I was speaking with another agent that wasn't from our company, and she had 4 listings last week, or 2 weeks ago, and all but one of them is still on the market because they swung for the fences on the price. So when you're doing comparables, especially now, I highly, highly recommend that you do not chase the market up the way we seem to be doing with listings right now.
I am going to completely agree with Brenda on this. I've been telling my sellers that we need to list at our list, you know, the price range that we've established, and let the buying market decide what it's worth. If they want to put in a high offer, more power to them, but let's not start that high, because you're going to, like Brenda said, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot by doing that.
Mhm. Absolutely. Has
and then
anybody
you've got
else
the appraisals.
experienced that? Seen that happen? Give me.
Yes, I
Okay.
had 3 on the market and we priced it to where the comps were. And I did that on another one last year and kind of got ridiculed. I said, you underpriced it. No, I didn't. I priced it where the market was, and then the market brought the value and pushed it up. The one last summer pushed it up over 20,000. And this one, we had 19 offers, but my seller was very mindful. He said, I'm not going to take the highest one because I know it's not going to appraise for that.
Yep.
So we took one and negotiated with them and got him where he wanted. He used them to his advantage and said, okay, this is what I want. I know this could appraise, so I'm going for this one.
That is a smart seller, and congratulations to you, Marie, for giving him the knowledge and the tools to make a good decision that way, because I'm telling you, it's like the Wild West out there for so many things. And then you struggle to get the appraisal, and you know, it's very frustrating, but good for you. Way to go.
Thanks.
You can be my agent. Good job. I absolutely agree. I had a difficult property to price. It was for my buyers. They were looking at purchasing a home in Derby, and it was a quad level. I went back 3 months, not another quad level or bi-level or 1.5 story or 2 story sold in the whole subdivision. I went back 6 months, not another quad level, tri-level, or bi-level sold in the whole subdivision. And when you're comparing a quad level to a ranch, it's like comparing apples and monkeys. It doesn't work. So I had to explain to my buyers that ultimately this is going to be the appraiser meeting the appraisal to the purchase price, if he can. A long time ago, many years ago, I had a listing that was in a moderate area, and it had an indoor pool. And my sellers wanted to price it at $320,000, and this was 13 years ago. And it was at West and Zoo Boulevard. So $300,000 in that neighborhood was just not going to happen. And so I made them a deal, and I told them that I wanted to get an appraisal. Let's have somebody come appraise the property, and whatever that appraisal was, I would be comfortable with it, but these were my comps and this is what it was, and I just couldn't see any other way. So they agreed and didn't know who to call for an appraisal. So I told them, I'll get somebody and I'll give you some names. I called 19 appraisers, and explain the situation, and none of them would take the job. And finally, I spoke to an appraiser and I said, what am I doing wrong here? What am I doing wrong? And he said, Brenda, our job is to prove the value we're given. Our job is not to set the value. The market sets the value. Our job is to prove the value we're given. He said, if you look at us appraising refinances, and he said, we are very conservative on refinances because we are not asked to prove a value, we are asked to set a value. And that is not our job. And he said, you give me on this particular house, you give me a price a buyer's willing to pay for it, and I'll figure out if I can meet it. And he said, but you tell me to set a value on this property, I have absolutely no idea because there isn't another home like it. He said, if you got me a price of $200,000, I could find a way to make that work because I could use square footage, I could use amenities, I could use upgrades. And he said, you get me a price of 140, I can make that work too. But you tell me you want me to value this property, that is not my job. Sorry. So that I have taken with me, and that has become my heart in this business, is that it is not the appraiser's job to set the value. It is their job to prove the value once they're given to it. So when we say the appraiser needs to take into consideration how long the house has been on the market, how many offers, how well the upgrades that the seller did, all of those things, they usually do, because they're working to prove the value that the buyer's willing to pay. If they can't get there, then they can't get there and they can't prove it. So then their report shows what they can prove. Now, I have had a few appraisers lately that have gone out, and I find this interesting, and I'm waiting to see, I've got one in Augusta coming up. Their appraisal is due like on the 26th, and they set the appointment to view the property on the 25th. And then they turn it in on the 25th, which means that before they ever view the property, they have all their research and all of their stuff done. They upload the pictures and send it. I have had one appraiser do this 3 times, and each time the house did not appraise.
I have a question for both you and Lance, based on what you just said.
Mhm.
Before we turn it over to Lance, I want to make sure we kind of stay on time. Sorry, Brenda.
No, you're fine. I can't say hello in 20 minutes. Go ahead.
So have either one of you, as a listing agent, sent comps to an appraiser prior to him going out and turning in an appraisal?
Brenda, I'll let you answer that first.
I do not send them to them. I leave them on the counter.
Yep.
As well as with a list of all of the updates that the seller has done and anything that the seller wants the appraiser to know.
Okay, Lance?
I basically do the same thing if I'm concerned or worried that it won't appraise. I always ask my sellers to write out, I don't care how they do it, handwrite it, type it up, whatever they want to do, but to spell out what improvements or repairs they have made on the property since their ownership. If they've put Corian countertops in, whether an appraiser is going to take that into account or not, it's a whole nother ball of wax. But at least we want him or her to know that these are the improvements that have been done. They put a new roof on it 3 years ago, whatever the case may be. So I completely agree with Brenda. And if as far as the improvements, when it comes to, if I'm concerned about my own price range or the contract price, whatever the case may be, I will leave out comps. And I'll write a little note on there to the appraiser saying, just to let you know, these are the homes I use to help price this out. And that's it. I don't want to say anything in there or indicate that they don't know how to do their job. I just want to let them know, hey, this is what I came up with.
So my comment to all that is, if you've got an appraisal that goes to 2 or 3 hands before it gets to the bank, it's too late. Appraiser is going to go back and change his price after the bank has it. You're stuck.
There is a process for fighting an
You
appraisal.
got lucky.
However, the deal with fighting an appraisal is that the appraiser that did the appraisal is the one that has to change the value. Now, let me ask you, how many appraisers are going to say, oops, you're right. I don't know my job. Let me use that instead.
I've had one that has done that for me.
I've had one, and it was because he was just looking at the wrong house. I mean, he had the pictures right and everything, but when he was doing his comparables, he was using wrong information. And he
Well,
said, oops.
well, the buyer actually sent me the appraisal and I looked it over. He just didn't adjust it like he did some of the other ones as far as closing costs and stuff like that. So he goes, send me 3 more and I'll look at them. So I did, and he used one of them and got it up.
Good for you. Good for you. And that's an appraiser that, you can truly respect, because I've had appraisers that, I had one just very recently that came in. It was a conventional loan. The first appraisal came in $32,000 under what me and the other agent felt the property should be listed, or should appraise for. $32,000, and I'm talking about a $700,000 house. The seller agreed to pay for another appraisal, and it came in at value. How is that?
Yeah, I would like to know that answer.
Yeah. Pam
Yeah.
has a question.
Well,
Hi,
I have
Tammy.
Hi, can you hear me? I don't know if this is on or
It-
not.
it's on.
Okay. No, I had the same thing in the last 12 months. I've had 2 appraisers where I had issues. I actually asked for a copy of the appraisal, and I looked at the comps, and both of them missed a comp completely, only because it had sold. Well, I'm not even sure now. Memory's not as good, but he missed it, and I called him because he brought my property in under value, under what purchase price we'd agreed on, and he said send me the info, and I sent it to him, and he brought the property back up.
Nice.
And then the second one, I asked for a copy, and I called her and I said she missed an entire bedroom, which I know bedroom, but she missed it, and a bathroom too. And
Ooh.
she went back out to the property and then readjusted and brought the property not up to the purchase price, but closer, much closer. So
Nice job.
I say, if you can get a copy of that appraisal and you're willing to take the time to look at it, I would do that.
I think those are great examples that you guys have shared, and I believe that there are a small handful of appraisers that are willing to work with us. The rest of them, their egos are too big. Honestly, there's like, nope, I did it right, and I'm not going back.
Mhm.
Brenda, do you have anything else you want to add, or does anybody else have any questions for Brenda?
That was just going to be my question. Does anybody have any questions at all?
Anyone online? Jump in. Lynn's got a question, so the mic's getting passed here.
In my past experience, and tell me if you have experienced it too, when you're looking at your older homes, over 50, 80 years old, sometimes you can find comps that are similar on the main floor, but they don't have a basement, or they do have a basement, and your subject property doesn't have a basement, or does have a basement, but that other one didn't have a basement, and it actually comps out higher than some that do have basements. So I think that that's one thing people need to be aware of is there's a nuance to different factors that everybody needs to be aware of.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I have had that happen, especially over in the Eastboro area and Eastboro adjacent area, where only about, half the homes have basements. But in older homes, even though if you talk to an appraiser, if you sit down and have a cup of coffee with an appraiser, he will tell you every house has to have a roof. Whether that roof is 10 years old or 10 days old doesn't matter to me because they function in the same way. He will tell you that, but when he actually does his evaluation, that has not held true in my appraisals that I have had. They appraise a newer roof more. Same thing with windows. Does the house have newer windows or does it have older windows? I don't care, as long as they have older, as long as they open and close, it's all the same to me. Same thing with appraisers will tell you that there are low grade finish, medium grade finish, and high grade finish, and that it is a price adjustment for each. Well, I got to tell you, you can have two houses that are 80 years old, and if one of them has original windows and original roof and slab foundation or crawl foundation, and another one has upgraded windows, upgraded roof, or new windows, new roof, and a basement, the new windows and new roof are going to play a part in that value as much or more than that basement property does. And vice versa. If you've got a property on a crawl that has new roof, new windows, and upgraded fixtures, it's a rehab or whatever, no basement, but the one 2 doors down has a basement but doesn't have those upgrades, that one without the basement is going to appraise for more.
I had one recently where an appraiser, which blew my mind, because like you're pointing out, supposedly condition doesn't really factor in that much, but in actuality it does. I had an appraisal recently on a brand new house, literally brand new. The appraiser went in and appraised it. One of the comps he used was a 60-year-old house because it had been completely updated and looked brand new. So
my
I
comment
think-
to that is, like Fred said when he was here, is that you could take a house that's completely remodeled on the inside and possibly compare it to newer homes. My thought on that is, I've always been told that appraisers will adjust for condition. They will make adjustments for condition. They may not add, they may not add a certain value, but they will take a percentage. So if I've got my subject property that's been completely remodeled, and a comparable that they're using that still has the old paneling on it and hasn't really been updated, they may take whatever value they come up with on this and bump it up 20-25% or whatever their number is, just because the subject property has had the improvements. So that's what I've always been told. And I think that kind of goes in line with what Brenda is saying, is that, they're not going to tell you they're not going to add for a roof, but they may bump up the condition of the property because it has that new roof.
I'm going to say, and then move on to Lance. My point to asking the question about how you get in contact with the appraiser beforehand, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Have you ever heard that before? Boy, I almost got that out in one sentence, didn't I? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's much easier for an appraiser to see what you base the price on before he does it than to have to go back through all the steps to try to get it done. So yes, you can challenge sometimes, but if you can prevent it in the first place, why challenge? So
I can tell you what I do on my listings. When they call me to set up the appraisal, I'll call them, especially on multiple offers, and tell them why it's way over the asking price. That way they know the market's willing to pay that.
I don't think that we should be afraid to talk to appraisers or afraid to offer appraisers information that they would not have just looking through the home. The things that we need to remember is that as busy as we are is as busy as they are. So when they're going through these houses, it is boom, 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 boom. And they're not paying attention to the details the way your seller did, the way you did, the way the buyer did when they made the offer on the property. So if you put together something that sits on the counter and says, for you, Mr. Appraiser, whether they use it or not, you are not looking to influence their decision, which is what has been pounded into our head for the last 10 years, ever since the new mortgage, well, they're not new anymore, but ever since the mortgage crisis, it's been pounded into our head that appraisers are God and we can't talk to them and we need to keep an arm's length distance, and anything that we say we can use our license, lose our license for, so we need to be so careful. We need to create a relationship with every appraiser so that we are partners in this. And if you leave something on the counter or give them a call and say, do you want me to send you what I got? Or I just want to tell you there were 17 offers in 2 days. There is nothing wrong with that. You're not saying I need this to appraise or you're not going to get a Christmas card from me this year. So I think giving them the information about what has been done to the property, how many offers you had, what comps you use to create the offers is very, very helpful. And throwing it on the counter and telling them, you know, this is yours. I left it on the counter for you. Whether they use it or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you've represented your seller to the best of your ability by providing that.
Okay. Thank you, Brenda, very much. You are going to stay on the call with us.
I'm going to stay on the call. I'm just going to mute myself so I stop talking.
No, I want you to jump in on my stuff. So, one of the things I started out with this morning is saying that we all do things a little differently. And for those of you who know me well, you know I'm a number cruncher. I like to put the numbers together. No, I do not use a spreadsheet to do my CMAs. I've actually used a profile sheet and write them down on the sheet. So what I approach things a little bit differently than Brenda. What I've always been taught to do way back when I first got in the business, and I've talked with a couple of different appraisers over the years, actually treated them to lunch and so forth, just to get some ideas. And I try to work my price ranges very similar to what an appraiser would do. Brenda hit the nail on the head by saying, don't give your sellers a price, give them a price range. So I will come up with a set number and I'll go above what I call my target price. And then I'll go, okay, so here's my target price. I think we can list it at this higher end price, start there. And depending on what the market does, here's your low end price. That target's usually pretty much smack dab in the middle. So I always give them a price range, and you should do the same thing. What I do is I add and subtract values. So I take what my subject property is and then I compare it to, let's say, 3 different houses. And I will add and subtract what that house has compared to my subject property. And then that gives me a price. And a lot of times what I will do when I am sitting in front of a seller is I will go through the differences on that property and say, based on what this house sold for, your home is probably worth $200,000. Okay, that's not set in stone. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to show them the differences. Your house has 3 bedrooms. This one has 4. Your house has 1,200 square feet. This house 1,300. So I'm trying to, set them up so they understand. Yeah, Joe down the street may have said that he sold his house for $200,000. Here's the reason why, and here's the reason why you are either going to get more or get less. So I always have proof that in my back pocket, these are the differences. So not only do I take a look at the MLS, and I put majority of my stock, majority of my emphasis on the information in the MLS when I work up my CMA, okay, when I'm actually comparing it. But I also take a look at the taxes. I'm not sitting there comparing one tax to another, but more importantly, I'm finding out what the land values are. Brenda talked about a lake lot versus a standard lot. In the appraisal, you can actually go in and see what value you've given for that property for just the land, not the improvements. And a lot of times you can go in and see that a standard lot in a regular subdivision, let's say Bradford North up there by 21st and Mays, maybe they've given a value of $25,000 for the lot. And you go down the street and you get one that's actually on the lake, that thing may be worth $35,000. So I'm like, okay, do I want to give, is it worth $10,000 more because it's on the lake lot? Am I just automatically going to give that 10 grand? I'm going to take a look at the market a little bit and see if I can find more comparables that have sold on the lake lot. Okay. But I will make adjustments for the size of the lot. So that what I'm getting at is I add and subtract. So I also look at the taxes. I also will pull up RPR. Now, RPR, you guys all know RPR is not always accurate. Sometimes it gives you some wonky numbers, but I will at least take a look at that. And the reason I do that is if I'm taking a look at it, what are our other realtors doing? They're doing the same thing, right? They're probably going in and looking at the RPR to see what the values are. So I will take a look at that. In some cases, I will, if I have a comp that has sold for 210, let's say, I will pull it up in RPR to see what that value is. And then I will figure up a percentage, take 210 divided by 200,000. It gives me 1.1% or whatever, okay, 1.05%, and multiply that times what RPR says my subject property is, okay? Now, I don't put a lot of stock in it. It's, again, I'm a number cruncher. I like doing that kind of stuff, but it gives me an idea of what our house is selling for above and beyond what RPR is calling out. Okay, so I also use RPR, but most importantly, I use the CMA or use the MLS. Also, every comp that I use, I figure up what did that house sell for above or below list price, and I average that out. So if I've got 3 listings that sold on the average at 3% below list price, then I have a general idea that if my target price is 200,000, then I could probably go up 3%. So I could probably list it at 206, maybe 210, and still have wiggle room. Does that 206, 210 fit my price range with the other numbers, with the other houses that I have? Do I have a comparable in there that proves or supports that 206, 210 price? So I take a look at it, and now with everything selling above and selling above list price now, I'm having to change that up a little bit. I still don't go up higher because it sold higher. Like Brenda said, we need to not chase the market. We need to let the market chase us, in my opinion. So I will show my sellers, hey, by the way, this house sold for 5% over list price. Well, we can list ours at 5%. No, let's not do that, because you're going to lose buyers by doing so. Let them compete for your listing. So I do take a look at over under. Always, and Brenda may or may not disagree, I always use net sold price. Always use net. As an example, if I have a house that is contracted for 230,000, but the seller is agreed to pay 4,000 in closing costs, what is the net to the seller? 226, right? That's what the seller is gaining. That's what they're getting for the sale of their home. However, what does the house have to appraise at? Has to appraise at 230. So there's a lot of people I'll have debates, not debates, discussions about which number that should be used. I like to use the net. And the reason I use the net is I will set it up as a net. So if it actually sold for 226, and then when I'm talking to my sellers, it's 226. If we get a buyer in here that offers 235 and they're asking for 5,000 in closing costs, now your net is 230. So I base everything off the net price. I don't like messing with the closing costs and so forth. There can be arguments about that, and I see both sides. I just like to work off based on what did the seller receive. Okay.
I agree with Lance because the appraisers always back that out. They look at the net sales price. They do not look at the gross sales price.
Yep.
So they always back the help out to get to their value. And I agree with Lance that you need to explain that to the sellers, and also qualifying it and saying, when you're looking at appraisal values, the appraisers are required to back that out. However, it did appraise for this. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at an area where you've got 15 comps, and of those 15 comps, 11 of them had seller concessions, even though that was backed out, that's backed out for value, You can also use that to explain to your seller, you can pretty much count on the fact that you're going to be paying concessions because nobody's got money.
Yep. Thank you, Brenda, on that. So there, I have talked to other realtors, not necessarily in our office, but my peers outside the office that have said, oh, you got to figure up on the full amount because that's what it appraised for. And like Brenda said, I think the appraisers are seeing the net value and they're going after that, knowing that the seller is paying some closing costs. They come up with the value, then they add the closing costs to it. That's just my opinion. I don't know that for certain, but it hasn't bit me in the butt yet. Year built. I couldn't agree more with Brenda. The age range is very, very important. What I do when I'm selecting homes is I'll find houses that are 5 years younger or 5 years older than the subject property. I try not to go any higher than that. Now, the older the homes are, like if they built in 1940, I may go 10 years up or 10 years down because I need I need to find more comps. Okay. So age is important. Do I make adjustments for age? Yes, I do. It depends on how new the house is and how big the house is. It can range anywhere from $100 a year to $1,000 a year. It really is a gut thing. Again, this is all these numbers that we're talking about is something that every one of us is going to do differently. You may be looking at me going, you're crazy for making adjustments for age. Well, I'm sorry. A house that's built in 2005 has more value than a house that was built in 2000. You look at the appraised values, it's going to be that way. When it comes to square footage, I'm sorry, go ahead, Cindy.
I do have a question because all of this inflated pricing on what's happening now in the market, I'm wondering how we're going to be doing comps in the future with the ones that are getting 20, 25,000 above. And then we have to show it in the MLS what it sold for.
Mm-hmm.
How many of us are going to know really what was out of pocket cash and what was praised for? Because what's happening is a lot of people, and I have one right now, an escalated clause going right now. And I've explained to my buyer, if it doesn't appraise this price, you have to come out of pocket. Now,
So,
how are we going to know what is out of pocket?
that is a great question, Cindy. And Brent, I'm going to jump on this because Greg and I have had this discussion. Both Greg and I serve on the MLS board of directors. And one of the things that I have talked about is, okay, as an example, you have a house that's listed at 220. And we get a contract in on it for 230. Okay. It appraises at 225. It has a clause in there that the seller or the buyer will agree to pay the $5,000 difference. So now they sign off on it. Okay. There isn't any fields in our MLS that shows that the seller or the buyer paid above what the mortgage rate is, or what the mortgage amount was. Okay. The appraised amount. And we've had this discussion, and I don't remember why we thought we couldn't do that because, I know why, because an appraised amount is not property of everyone else. It is a property of the seller and other appraisers. So I'm sorry, the buyer, excuse me. Yeah, the buyer and other appraisers. So that is the reason why we don't have access to it. Because I've even talked about the idea of, can we put a field in there in the MLS that shows that they paid over the appraised amount? To answer your question real quick is that I think, when Fred was here, I said, I made this comment. We have seen an escalating market. The prices have gone up long enough now that you can go 6 to 12 months back and still be okay. What I'm concerned about, like Brenda was talking about in Andover, we've been seeing this. Now it's starting to round off. Now we're going to start coming down. And when we start coming down and we're going back, in 6 months, when we're looking back at this time, is our market going to be the same? Are we going to have to be making adjustments? Just like we've adjusted up, we're going to have to start adjusting down. Lynn, you had a question.
I've had this twice in the last few months where I have had enough cash from the buyer to where the appraisal requirement was waived, and both buyers paid more than list price, but no appraisal was even done because they had enough cash and they didn't care what it valued at. They wanted the house.
Yeah. And so that is, each individual lender is going to be different when it comes to that. Some lenders are going to say, yeah, if you want to pay the difference, go for it. And then there's some loan types, and some lenders that won't allow that. If you're going to get a loan through us, it's got to appraise. You can't pay
Hold
above
on,
and
Lance.
over.
I think what she means, because I've had this several times and I don't mean
Go
to
for it.
interrupt, but I think what she means is not only is the buyer agreeing to not care what it appraised at, the bank is saying, you have so much money down, we're not even going to do an appraisal.
Yeah.
Our desk
Yeah.
review says that this property is worth X, and you're financing less than 20% of our desk review, or less than 80% of our desk review. So we're not going to charge you for an appraisal. We're not going to do an appraisal. We don't care.
Oh, there you go.
And so there's no appraisal done. It's as if it were a cash transaction.
Sharon said on text, in the Colorado market, they have the appraisal gap included in their actual 16-page contract. Maybe MLS can insert field of the appraisal gap shown. It'll be something that Greg and I can talk about and figure out what kind of rules and regulations we can get away with on that. But I think it is something that would be good to see. Is it going to change? Is it going to be something? Is it going to be something that's going to change the way I do things? Probably not, because what a house sells for is what a house sells for. Yeah, I mean, that's what the market value is calling for. So you had a question, Pam? Oh, okay.
I have a question on that, because I understand what you're talking about as far as, this is a, what the appraisal gap is, like what the house appraised for. But when you're looking at comps, we're not looking at what the house appraised for. When we're looking at values in a neighborhood,
Exactly.
we're looking at what properties sold for. And I don't think that appraisers can artificially deflate the market just because someone agreed to pay over appraised value.
Correct.
That ultimately, buyers and sellers determine the market. So if buyers are willing to pay more than what homes have ever been worth, then that is what the level of the market has gone to. Whether or not, I mean, these buyers right now may get totally screwed. A year from now, buyers might not be willing to pay that much, and it'll drive the market down. But right now they are, and I think that's the value. It's not what a house appraises for that gives it its value.
Couldn't agree more. And that would, just before you jumped in, that's what Pam and I were just talking about and agreeing upon. I'm like, even if I know what that gap is, it's the market showed us what a house is worth. So
I think that's worth a point of educating the buyers as well, because as you said, the buyers are kind of backing off. Brenda, didn't you say that earlier? That the buyers, that there's this stalling. Yeah, but educating these buyers, because they're paying a pretty penny for these properties, and when the market swings, but of course we hope our buyers are going to be in the home they're buying for a long time, and we all know the market goes back and forth, but will the market ever go back up to the level that it is today? That's a good question. But at the end of the day, it's how much a buyer's willing to buy a property, and I agree. I don't know that an appraiser dictates that.
So moving forward, the other things that I look at when I am comping out properties is I do look at the square footage. And for those of you who have been around me and heard me say this, I do not look at the total square footage. I cannot take two identical houses, I mean, exactly the same in size. If one sells for $100 a square foot, then this one should sell for $100 a square foot. Wrong. Like Brenda said earlier, every piece of dirt's different. In my case, if you look at put it over here, if you look at this picture, if these two houses are identically the same, one has a deck and the other one doesn't, or one has a fireplace, the other one doesn't, one has a 1-car garage and the other one has a 2-car garage, does that not change the price per square foot? So if you have two identical houses, and this is what an appraiser explained to me, you have two identical houses, one has a deck and the other one doesn't, the one with the deck has got to be more price per square. I don't even look at price. Matter of fact, you look at my profile sheets, there isn't anything in here that says price per square foot. It drives me nuts when I see stuff on Zillow, on other people's stuff. It drives me nuts because it doesn't make any sense to me. So what I do is, based on my conversation with an appraiser, is if I have a house that is, let's say 1,200 square feet and the other one's 1,100 square feet, that's 100 square feet difference. Depending on the age of the homes, I will take anywhere from $20 to $30 per square foot difference. That's the number I use, anywhere from 20 to 30, depending on the age. AGLA, because what is finished in a basement costs a lot less than what you got to build upstairs or on the main floor up. Everything up has got to have a roof on it. So it costs more to build. When it comes to basement square footage, I will use anywhere from 10 up to 20 a square, depending on the age. So let's use this basement as an example. Let's say the kitchen is unfinished. This whole space is finished. So I'm going to figure out, okay, this is how much square foot is in it. The next house, that area is finished. The kitchen area is finished. Does that house not have more value? Absolutely. So I'm going to take that additional square footage and multiply that times $10 to $20 a square, depending on the condition of the home and the age. Brenda brought up a great point about foundation. It's not just about partial base or basements versus no basements. It's also about view out versus daylight. Sherry builds, she does a lot of business on new homes. Sherry, can you tell us, hand her the microphone. So when you have a house when you guys are building houses where it's a view out versus a daylight, does it not cost more to have a view out basement?
What costs more in a view out basement is the deck. Because now with the view out, you have to have a deck and stairs.
Right.
And the deck and stairs is very expensive because it's wood. In fact, we used to have an upgrade to man-made deck flooring and stair treads. Now the man-made material is standard because wood is so expensive.
Right.
So with that deck and, your lot's going to cost a little more with a view out, but regular windows are cheaper than escape concrete wells,
Right.
ingress egress wells. And so from that standpoint, but it is more aesthetically nice to have the natural light come into the basement.
Right.
So it's a trade-off, but it is more expensive because the view out lots are traditionally more expensive.
Right.
And a little bit, but the big difference is the cost of the deck and stairs.
So thank you for answering that. My thought is, I'm not going to tell you the values I use because it's all over the board. It really depends on the age of the house. It depends on what the lot, like she said, the lots. But I do make adjustments for it. If I've got two comparables that, man, this thing's right on the money with my subject, but my subject property is a view out or a walkout, even a walkout pit, I'm going to give it more value on it. And so that I make that adjustment. And Sherry will probably shoot me for saying this, but I usually go anywhere from about 1,500 up to 5,000, depending on the size of the house.
Let me tell you, the new deck ranges from the smaller houses to the even average size house.
Mm-hmm.
They're now, upwards of $8,000 to $12,000.
Right.
Because the cost of lumber.
Yeah, and I get that, and it's just like we were talking about earlier, as far as if you put a new roof on it, can you add that amount to the, that's just me based on what I think is valuable to the market. What in my opinion, Lynn may think that you're way too low. Well, more power to you. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to take that into consideration as far as the type of foundation or type of basement. You also, I remember I listed a property a number of years ago up by 13th and actually 21st and Woodlawn that had a basement, but it was only a partial basement. A lot of the other houses in the area were all completely full basements. So my subject property, do I have to bring the value down a little bit? Absolutely. So now I'm thinking, okay, what number am I going to use? You can go to the Sedgwick County website or any county website and find out what the actual perimeter of the basement is. And then you subtract. What I did was I found out what my comps, what my comps were, and I subtracted the amount of space that my subject property had and made adjustments. Now for a basement, I'm usually doing anywhere from $10 to $15 per square just for the concrete. That's not finished space, that's for the difference in basement size. The other thing I will tell you is what I see a lot of realtors making mistakes on is they will have the wrong square footage for the basement, you know, the finished square footage. The best way to do that is to go into the basement. Don't measure up the rooms. Don't measure up the rooms because every wall in that basement is considered finished space. Okay, that's a part of the finished space. Instead, what you should do is go measure the unfinished part of the basement and subtract it from what the basement total basement square footage is. Mm-hmm. That's what I do. Yeah, that's what I'm, yeah, it's subtract the unfinished part. That's what I'm saying. Measure the unfinished part and subtract it. Okay. A lot of times you'll see that if a seller has not pulled any permits to finish out a basement during their ownership, they may have added more square footage to a basement that's not being seen by the county. So every listing I take, I don't care if the county's right or wrong, I'm measuring up that space. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how I calculate my square footage. I don't do the whole price per square. I just figure, you know, $20 to $30 per square and make my adjustments. I think Brenda is spot on when she said, you know, she's going up to 18% high or low because that's what appraisers do. I try to stay within 100 square feet. So that's something I've learned from Brenda that I'm probably going to start using more so or not. The idea is I'm trying to find properties, comps that are as close as possible to my subject property. And I will literally, if I've got 4 of them, I start with the one that's the closest. Okay. Bedrooms. Unlike Brenda, and this is the difference for me. She talked about the importance of square footage. My approach is the square footage is a little different. I do add or subtract values for bedrooms. If it is a 2 bedroom versus a 3 bedroom, for me, it's about $3,500 difference. If it's a 3 to 4, again, $3,500. But once you get past 4 bedrooms, that number comes down because there ain't a lot of buyers out there that need 5, 6, 7 bedrooms, if that makes sense.
I got a question for you.
Hold on a second. We got a question on the floor. There you go.
I had an appraiser one time say that it's what's normal for the neighborhood, whether you add or subtract value for bedrooms, and that seriously, it's the value of bedrooms is dependent on an individual's needs. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It depends on
Right.
this individual's needs. However, there are certain price ranges where a certain number of bedrooms are expected, and I think that's over 250 or something like that, that they expect to have 4 bedrooms. And in that case, then you'd want to subtract if there's not the 4th bedroom or 5th or whatever. So I guess I agree and I disagree to some extent, and it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, it really is. Brenda, you were going to make a comment? You're muted. There we go.
One of the questions that I have, because and I'd love to put this out to everybody, is I have had it both ways where I have a house in a subdivision where all of the houses are, let's say, 11 to 1,200 square feet, and the seller has added on, and now I've got a house that's 17 or 1,800 square feet, but it's the only one. Or I have a house where everyone has converted the garage, or all of the houses are much larger, and everything is 11 to 1,500 square feet, and I've got one that's 700. My question is, because I've seen it go both ways, that larger than everything else square foot, if you break it down to a price per square foot in the area and then add every square foot on the main floor as if it were the same price as every other square foot, you end up at double the price of everything else in the market, which doesn't make any sense at all and doesn't work. And if you take the square footage on the smaller house and do a price per square foot and use it, you end up with half the price of everything else in the market, and that doesn't work. Does somebody have a rule of thumb as far as when you're dealing with either a minuscule home that there's nothing else in the market like it for that square foot, or a very large home with additions and there's nothing else?
What I do, and I just worked up. I had to do a CMA for some buyers that on a contract that we got it accepted. Thank God. For some shock because it was only on the market for a couple of days. This house was over 3,000 square feet, and it's over by 13th and Meridian, and there aren't a lot of houses that size. And so I not only did I have to go farther out, but I had to go a little bit farther back in time. So I went a full 12 months to find stuff that is even close. And I'm looking at 19, 2,000, 2,200 square foot homes, comparing it to a 3,000 square foot home. Am I going to use that same principle of $25 per square foot in that? No, it's coming down price per square because they're so drastically different. I don't even remember. I'd have to go back and look at my notes on what actual number I used, but it made sense to me. I don't know if that answers your question, but I make that price range per square foot for me changes depending on the house. Now, if they're all cookie cutter homes, they're all basically the same, you've got to use that same number on each comparable. But if you've got something that's like way out there and really throws your numbers out the door, then I'm going to adjust, bring it down a little bit price per square. She talked about finished garages. I'm sorry, to me, finished garages are not quite the same as the regular house because one, it doesn't have a foundation underneath it. You're walking straight on concrete. So it's not the same to me. So I will make an adjustment. If I can tell on a smaller house that they've converted it, then I'm going to reduce the amount of price per square, if that makes sense. Bedrooms, when we talk about bedrooms, I don't want to say it in my defense. My thought is this: there is a reason why we have to disclose in the MLS. If you have a fourth bedroom downstairs, the only way it's a legal bedroom is if it has egress, right? So that adds value to the house because that's a bedroom that another house may or may not have. So a lot of times the changes, and like I said, I try to find comparables that are right on the money, the same number of bedrooms. But let's face it, you're not always going to have that. So does that bring value to a buyer? Like Lynn said, every buyer is going to be different. Bathrooms, I adjust for the number of bathrooms. I usually am anywhere from 35 up to 5,000 per bathroom.
Do you adjust for the difference between, say, there's a bathroom upstairs, a bathroom downstairs versus two bathrooms upstairs because one's an ensuite? Do you have any?
I make that adjustment. I don't, if they're identically the same number of bathrooms, to me, that doesn't matter where the bathroom's at. What I do is I make the adjustments for an ensuite. So in other words, I will add, if one house has a master bathroom that only has a stand-up shower and a toilet versus a master bathroom that's got both a separate tub, a separate shower, two sinks, whatever, I'm going to make an adjustment for the size of that master bath. A normal buyer is going to look at those two bathrooms and say, yes, this one's more valuable than this one. So I make the adjustments there instead of adjustments on the number of bathrooms. It will, and I'm giving away all my secret sauce here. Usually it's anywhere from 1,000 up to 3,000, depending on what's in it. So that's how I manage my bathrooms. I usually do, like I said, anywhere from 3 to 5. It's usually around 4,500, depending on the age. When it comes to garage size, Brenda and I have collaborated on this a number of times over the years. I usually, if I've got an identical house that's got a 2-car attached and my subject property's got a 3-car attached, but everything else is the same, I'm still going to use it. I'll still use a 3-car compared to a 2-car or vice versa. I usually add about 4,000 per bay.
And do you adjust for a main floor laundry versus a basement
Yes.
laundry?
I don't. Now we're getting into the weeds,
Yeah.
and that's what I've been accused of, Lynn. You can ask Greg and Sandra, and Cheryl Hubert was here. She would tell you. Brenda would probably, laugh at me too. I have a tendency to get into the weeds too much. So what I'm trying to cover in today's class is the general, the changes that those are automatics for me. But to answer your question, yes, I would make an adjustment for it, lower level versus main floor.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you feel like it's a value difference, or do you feel like it's a preference difference for an individual? Because older folks would want a
Right.
main floor, your younger folks don't care. So is there really a value difference?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I think ultimately we're trying to be precise in the value we come up with,
Mm-hmm.
when indeed ranges are where we ought to be working in. The market will set the precise value. So if I've got a 1,200 square foot house and it's the only home in the neighborhood that does not have a main floor laundry, and all my comps have main floor laundries, is that worth more to some buyers or not? Maybe. Would it be worth an adjustment? Maybe. But is it going to figure into my range a little bit? Yeah, I might make the range a tad higher or lower based on that. But it's going to be really more of a gut feel instinct than it is a precise number.
And Greg is spot on with that. The numbers I'm giving you guys is just a guide for me. You may think that bedrooms are not worth anything. You may think they're worth more. It's a guide for you to use to set a price range. So I'm going to skip over some other stuff here and get to the end part. So what I do then is now I have, let's say, 4 subject properties that I look at. I have established a set price for each of those 4 for my subject property. I will then I list them out, and then I figure up what the average is between the 4 of them. I will also take a look at the median price. And if I've got a huge array, in other words, a huge difference between the bottom and the low number on the 4, then I'm really trying to come to think about, okay, where is that price range now? If I add 3% to it, am I still add to 3% to my target price? Am I still at or below what the highest comp was? Does that make sense? Am I still, if I take 3 or 4% off, am I still above what my lowest house, the comp in there that was the lowest? So I come up with that range. Now my range isn't always 3 or 4% above or below. I take a look at the subject properties and figure out, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I also take a look at the current actives. I know a lot of people will look at the expireds and the pendings and so forth. I do that too, but I need to know what the competition is. When I get accused of, well, you're adding too much, you're getting too much into the weeds, guys, I'm telling you, and Greg and I've had this discussion about Cloud CMA. I want to get in front of my seller because I know that she's got a ton of pride in her home, and she's been told by her neighbors that her house is worth 220. I've got a house here that's very similar and only sold for 200,000. I need to show her this is the reason why. Their house had a wooden fence. That adds value. They had a well on the property. They had a sprinkler system. You don't have any of these, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Do I add those numbers in? Yes, because I'm a number cruncher. So some of the things I will add are, if there's anything special in the basement or like a wet bar, I may make a change for that. A washer and dryers, appliances. We don't even want to get into pools. We covered that the other day. Above or ag buildings. The best way to do ag buildings, guys, is to go and measure the barns or get the measurements for those ag buildings and do the same exact thing, figure out a price per square foot. So if a house, a barn has, it's a wood barn and it's gigantic and has a wood floor and only has power, doesn't have anything else to it, no other utilities to it, I'm probably giving that $8 to $10 a square. These are numbers that I'm getting from an appraiser. If I've got a metal building, Sandra and I co-listed a farm property out by Cheney Lake a couple years ago. It had 4 different ag buildings on it. At least 4 or 5, and it had also had a mother-in-law's quarters basically on the property. Every one of those buildings was different. One was wood, one was an old wooden barn. The other 3 were metal buildings. 2 of them had concrete floors. 1 of them had power, electricity, and water. So the ones that with the power, electricity, and water are going to get more price per square. Okay. So I look at that. I'll look at, as Sherry was here earlier, talking about patios, covered patios versus regular patios, covered decks versus regular decks. It costs a little bit more to put that covered deck on it. Fences, sprinklers and wells, in my opinion, that adds value to a property. Again, the well to me is usually about a $1,500, $1,000 to $1,500 increase in value.
And let's say this, you're trying to come up with the value for a well. If 3 of the houses out of your 8 comps have wells in it, you can figure that. You don't need $1 for the well or the sprinkler. Just because I want to get to the last questions.
Okay.
And I have one for you and Brenda and actually anybody in the room.
Well, but let me finish up real quick because I'm pretty much, once I go through all these changes, I have that, like I said, I have the numbers. One other thing that I want to talk about, because I know this has been asked a lot lately, is on remodeled homes, homes that have been completely gutted, homes that have maybe had a bathroom redone and so forth. Guys, to me, it is a gut feeling. It's a gut feeling. I want to see what the improvements are. Then I take those improvements and I look at my subject properties and I look through those photos to see if they've made any improvements. And then I will make an adjustment based on what I feel, and that just comes from experience. I may be completely off base. So I will piece it together instead of just doing one big giant number. Well, they completely gutted out the entire house. I recently went through one, give $8,000 for what they did in this living area. They completely redid the whole thing. All new sheetrock and everything. Going into the kitchen, I'd probably give it $6,000 or $7,000 on this. It's a small kitchen, but everything's brand new in it. $4,000 for a remodeled bathroom. Again, guys, it depends on the size of the bathroom, what they did to it. So you can't just willy-nilly say, okay, we're going to add $20,000 for all the newness. I like to piece it together because not every house is going to be like that. Fred said that you can take a house that's been completely gutted and redone and compare it to a brand new house. Okay, I agree. I kind of agree with that, but there's still the age factor is still there. Okay, so that's how I go about doing my stuff.
So quick question, it's a little more basic. Lance mentioned earlier, what is your ideal CMA have for comps? Do you do 3 listing or listed, expired, pending, all that? Do you do 5 each? What is your number and what is your ideal CMA include?
Brenda, I'll let you go first since I've been talking so much.
Okay. Here's my thing, because I always feel that I would rather be over-prepared than under-prepared. And I also always feel that sellers want to see how you got where you got. I have won many listings because I bring a whole bunch of information rather than just the 3 most likely comps. So for me, what I do, and Lance, I know I'm gonna never live this down, but I create a spreadsheet. God save me.
What? Wait a minute. Oh, that's it. Now I'm going to make a spreadsheet. Make it.
I know, right? I create a spreadsheet from the MLS that has every home in the area. I take a picture of the area that I'm using and I don't cross main roads. Then I take every home in that area and it's in a spreadsheet. From there, I take out the ones with the most differences in the house. So if I'm dealing with a ranch on a basement, I take out everything that isn't a ranch or isn't on a basement, and I put those in a spreadsheet. And that from there, then I go to square footage, take those up and bring it down. And I do this in pages on the CMA. So I show the seller, here is where we started. This is the area that we're talking about because real estate is a micro area. It is micro specific. So this is the area that we're talking about. This is everything that's sold in the last 6 months. In order to compare apples to apples, I have eliminated anything that isn't similar to your home in age, style, or foundation. We got these. In order to narrow that down more, I eliminated anything that isn't within 18% of your square footage because that's what an appraiser would do. Then I took those comps and I looked at what is better, similar, or worse than yours. As long as I have a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 7 that work in that range. And right now I have not used expired comps in a year because there aren't any. I mean, nothing's expired.
So when you say a minimum of 3, you mean 3 sold, or 3 could be active, could be pending?
I want 3 active or pending and 3 sold, because the active or pending gives us our competition, tells us how long things are staying on the market, and gives us the range of where people are looking in that neighborhood. The sold gives us the actual price that's selling.
Yep.
So I want a total minimum of 6
So
active or
Lane?
pending, 3 active or pending, 3 sold.
My rule of thumb is very similar to Brenda. I want try to at least get 3 solds, absolutely 3 solds. I put majority of my number, the stock is what I like to say. I put majority of my stock in those sold numbers. Now, like Brenda said, I want 3 actives or pendings because I want to be able to show the seller, this is what our competition is. And here's the price range we've set on based on what is sold. Where do we stand with our competition? Am I going to necessarily make changes to my, to my CMA because of what is on the market? Maybe, but I put a lot more stock in my solds than I do in actives and pendings. To me, actives and pendings is what they're hoping to get for the house, where solds is this is what it sold for, and that's exactly how I sell. I provide it to my sellers.
So I like that answer from both of you, that you have 3 each. And the reason I'm kind of went down this path is when we start trying to hyper analyze what each thing in the house would be, here's what the neighborhood will carry because it's sold. Here's other houses that people are viewing in the neighborhood, so we know we'll get them in your house. If we get them in your house, they're going to tell us whether your house is worth the money we're looking for. We can spend a whole lot of time deciding, as you say, main floor, laundry, basement. Does it have this? Does it have that? And will it help in the appraisal? Yeah. But by and large, our thing is, here's a range of sold. Here's what people are looking. They're looking here, and you're there on the sold side. We'll get people in your house and they'll tell us whether they will offer enough money or not.
Yep.
And that would be my closing comments, but I'll let everybody else do everything, and then I'll shut the recording off when you're ready.
So the last comment I'll make in regards to the way I do it, and yes, I do get in the weeds. I like getting in the weeds. That's just me, but I am able to, when it comes down to it, adding or subtracting $1,000 to one comparable property because it has a wet bar, is that really going to change that average between all 4 houses or all 3 houses? Very minimally, very minimally. But do I sit there and sit in front of the seller and say, well, I added or subtracted $1,000 for your wet bar? Absolutely not. I don't share my secret sauce, is what I like to call it. I don't share those numbers with my sellers. All I do is I point out, here are the differences. Because of the differences, your home is probably going to be worth X amount, or $220,000 based on what this house does or doesn't have compared to yours. Does that make sense? I don't share the numbers with them. Don't do that. Because if they're shopping around and talking to other realtors, who knows what. And I'm telling you, Brenda said this earlier, you or whoever said it earlier, you show up prepared and you're able to point out those differences, and another realtor, and you're competing for the business, and another realtor comes in and just says, oh, I think your house is worth X amount of dollars. Here are the comps I used. Who did their due diligence in taking care of that seller? You did. And chances are they're going to go with you. And when I run into a situation where a seller says, well, Lance, I think our house is worth $220,000. We like what you've done. We want to list with you, but you've got to list it at 220. When I've told them it's 200,000, my high end is 200,000, I won't take the listing. I won't. And that is somewhat of a negotiating tactic, because they'll say, what do you mean you're not going to take our list? No, because I don't want to waste your time, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. And quite frankly, I don't want to waste mine. Now, if you want to start at 210, and we can start at 210 maybe, but you got to agree to come down in your list price after a week. I'll do that. But I've turned listings away because they want to go up too high when I know there's no sense in me wasting their time. Okay, I'm done. So that's how we go about doing our stuff. Pam has got
I
a
have
question.
Comment to what you just said, because I had a client this year, Greg's familiar with it, an elderly lady, and she was dead set on her number. She didn't care what I said or how much I said. She said, my house is worth this, and this is why. And I took that listing. We listed it, and she came down 10,000 off her asking price. At one point, she did decide to come down, and she stayed with it. And I and the buyer agent, the buyer that came back to us the second time with a second offer, offered her asking price, also wrote in the contract he would pay cash if it didn't appraise. Both the
Nice.
agent and I both said, we don't think it's going to appraise. It appraised. Now, she was on the market. I think I listed that home in August, might have been October. Here it is. She closed on February 26th. Now, this is to me was a teaching moment, because it's more than just the range. It's important for me to know my client, what their time frame is, and what, and explain to them that the longer it sits on the market, here's the potential fallout if we don't get it sold. But she stood her ground, and in some ways, there is value in that, and she knew what she wanted to get out of it, and she ended up with it. So I don't know that it's always, give them a range, but also know your client and their time frame.
Yep.
And, and don't always let the market dictate or the rush to get it sold as soon as possible, especially if they don't have to sell as soon as possible. So,
No,
'cause
and
money
you
to
make
be
a great
left on the
point.
table, and
You make a great point, Pam, and thank you for sharing. So a couple things there I'm going to address. First and foremost, as you get to know your sellers, or for your buyers for that matter, I always explain to them, and I think I talked about this before, is if they are wanting top dollar for their house, they better expect to be on the market longer. If they need to sell it quicker, they better expect to go a lower price. My goal as your realtor, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is to get you here, to balance those out. Okay. And Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the reason I don't believe your home is worth 220,000 is, let me back up. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, where did you come up with that number, 220,000? Well, we met with Greg Fox with XYZ Realty, and he said it was worth 220,000. Okay. So, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I appreciate you sharing that with me. And if you would like to go that way, that's great. But my numbers show that the home is worth 200,000. And Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't want to buy your listing. And they'll look at you. What do you mean you don't want to buy my listing? I'm not going to tell you a number that I think you want in order to get your listing. Instead, I'm going to tell you a number that I honestly, truly believe will sell for. I don't want to waste your time. Now, here's the thing about it, and I actually say this to my potential clients, is I've had this happen twice. I've told sellers no, they go with another realtor, and within 30 to 60 days, they're calling me up. They've just canceled their listing agreement and they're listing with me because I said no, and they were swamboozled or whatever you want. I've also had sellers tell me, Lance, you're not the highest price. What's that?
Swamboozled.
Wamboozled. That's a Detroit language there. I've also had sellers actually tell me that I wasn't the lowest or not the highest price, but because I did the research and because I stood my ground negotiating a price for them, they wanted that kind of realtor for them when it comes to negotiating a contract.
Okay, I'm going to jump in just a moment. You guys can stay on this webinar as much as you want. We're kind of moving off the CMA a little bit.
Yep.
So I'm going to stop the recording, and then you may stay and attend as much as you wish from here. Thank you all very much for everything. Thank you, Brenda and Lance, for everything.
Brenda, thank you.
Thank
You've been
you.
awesome.